All right, so as you saw throughout the conference, my name is Lisette, and I'm taking off my hostess hat and putting on my speaker hat now. And what I wanted to do today was talk about hybrid working, so that if you decide to go back to the office, that you don't go backwards in time. So what we know is that the future of work will be hybrid. But what I like to say is that the future of work is choice. Right? It's choice for the individual to choose when and where we are most productive, and it's also choice for companies to decide how remote or hybrid that they want to be. I have too many devices. I can't hook the microphone to anything, so I'm getting confused. So there's this landscape of hybrid where most companies are fitting somewhere here. We've got some companies that are going back to the office 100%, or at least trying. The compliance rate has been surprisingly low. There are some companies that are having mandates for the number of days per week or per month or per quarter. Other companies are allowing individual teams to decide when and where they want to work. And then, of course, there are some companies that are getting rid of their physical headquarters completely and going 100% remote. Probably Automatic is the most famous company that's done that. They've just gotten rid of offices completely. And really, the difference in the preferences is not the problem, but it is a problem if being in the office gets rewarded over working somewhere else. And one of the things that we learned during the pandemic was that women and minorities really prefer working from home. And so now the worry is that the bosses that we'll see at the office will just be the older white men, and we'll lose the diversity that we gained by being able to go remote. One of my favorite authors and friend and mentor, Jürgen Appelo, he wrote the book Management 3.0 and also Managing for Happiness. He's got his new organizational design model called the Unfix model. And what he says in his blog post about this, he says, if you want an organizational structure that can handle the challenges of the 21st century, then you need to ensure that there's practically no difference between a physical team and a virtual team. And indeed, that's really what we're doing. We're making this shift in mindset from being office first, where the office is the primary place that we get our work done, and we're going towards a model of being more remote first, where the office becomes one of many places that we go to get our work done. So I want to start the conversation by taking us on a tour of offices over time, just to see how things have changed. And I want to start in the 1970s, of course. That's the title of my talk. And in the 1970s, in general, these are, of course, generalizations. In general, the open office plan was quite popular. And in fact, it was popular that the furniture could easily be moved around depending on the project that was happening or the teams that were being formed. And of course, calendaring and scheduling were done on physical walls, right? We had to check in or check out, or maybe some of you remember the punch cards where you would punch in and punch out. We move into the 1980s and the cubicle starts to make an appearance and become popular. So we're still in an open office, but we have some semblance of privacy with some cubicle walls. And before email, some of the ways we communicated with each other were through these interdepartmental mail envelopes where you'd print something out, put it in the envelope, and then sign it when you've read it, pass it on to the next person, usually in some sort of a mailbox or cubby in the office. And just to prove that I was there, this is my cubicle in the 1990s. The office that I worked in was an engineering firm. And what I remember about it is that there was a central secretary who would route all the calls to individual desks. I mean, this was before cell phones, of course. So I just wanted to show that I was there, I experienced it. And then we moved into the 2000s, and the open office plan makes a comeback again. And in fact, to this day, about 80% of offices in the United States are open office plans. The 2010s start coming, and tech starts making a big splash, right? The iPhones are out, and Twitter is out, and so offices are becoming hipper and more colorful as we're trying to attract the younger generation to come back. And now, what we really need to ask ourselves, I wonder if this will work. Now what we really need to ask ourselves is, what is the office for? And some of the things that change when we go from a physical space into a virtual space is that we become a culture that needs more documentation, right? All of these implicit agreements that we have with each other have to be made more explicit. It also means that we have to think about our information architecture, but probably in a different way than software engineers are used to thinking about. What I mean by information architecture is just the way our information is stored, right? Do we need security protocols? Is there a Google Drive? How do we get information in and out? One of the apps I recently interviewed said that people spend 1 to 2 hours a day searching for files. So we need to get a little bit more organized and structured. More feedback loops are necessary. I mean, the annual performance review never really worked in person, but remote, it is completely not workable. We need more feedback cycles like in the Agile community, and of course we need to master some new forms of communication. Some of the biggest changes that happen in organizations, they're going to happen on individual levels, on team levels, and on leadership levels. And the biggest change for individuals, let me back up by saying, during the pandemic, what we saw was that productivity was not the issue. We were just as productive online as we were in the office in general. But what was a problem was burnout. So it's people, right? It's I'm just going to check that email one last time at 7 p.m. and then 3 hours later we're still doing work, right? The work and life has just sort of blended too much. And in Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, he recommends that we be both on and off. So it means when we're on, being on and totally focused. And then when we're off, really being off. We are knowledge workers, most of us, and our brains need time to rest and to process information. We also want more personal connection, but we don't want more meetings. In general, we are all zoomed out at this point. Now, on the team level, it starts to get the biggest changes for teams is that we've got these multimodal way of working, right? We've got some people who are distributed, some people who are in person, some who are working asynchronously, some who are working synchronously, and on teams, it just requires more planning in general because we've got all these modes of working. The other thing that's changed is we're going from a time-oriented way of working to a results-oriented way of working. And it is really easy to say, but it is really difficult to measure, right? So if you think about your own productivity over the course of a couple of months, it definitely goes in waves. And so now we're measuring people by the value that they produce, and it turns out that it's surprisingly complicated. Now for leaders, I'll start by saying, as leaders, I believe that it's our job to define success and set the goals, and then get out of the way and let our teams take us there. And as leaders, I feel like it should be our job to remove the roadblocks for the teams. Now, in person, leaders can inspire with their charisma and their personality, right? It's like, come on, team, follow me. I know what I'm doing. And online, that charisma falls pretty flat. So what people want from their leaders, really, is a clear definition of success and more transparency into how our work fits into the larger system. So in general, the focus for leaders is a focus on autonomy because you can monitor people, but it'll just break down the trust in the organization. And you want more transparency so that people understand how their work fits into the bigger picture. So there's several ways. I want to go into 3 different ways that we navigate a hybrid working environment. And one is we have to modify how we communicate with each other. We have to define what is normal behavior for our teams. And we need to explore some new ways of being present with each other, right? Face-to-face is one form of presence, but there's actually others. And I'll show some examples a little bit later on. Now, all of this information is not just like I'm some expert, I'm going to tell you how it goes. That's not the case at all. I'm still learning constantly, but the information that I'm going to give today comes from the over 300 interviews that I've done now for the last 8 years on my podcast with teams who are rocking the remote workspace. And so you can find all of those for free on the website in video and podcast form. And then, of course, my book was published a couple of years ago. Very coincidental, and I'm grateful for the timing because it just came out right in time for the pandemic. So let's talk about how we modify how we communicate with each other. So over time, email and instant messaging have become the primary ways that we communicate with each other. And this back and forth messaging forms a sort of presence with our team, right? In this latest survey by GitLab, they said that how I signal to colleagues that I'm working on online, 70% are saying they're sending and replying emails. And in fact, the statistics show that we check our inboxes about once every 6 minutes, and we check our instant messaging systems about once per minute on average. Now, suddenly, it's not just a game of ping pong, right? Now we have more and more apps. So in the same survey, we see that on average, we're getting notifications, work notifications, on 6 different apps. So now we're not just playing ping pong back and forth on email, we're playing ping pong on 7 different tables. So the problem is, most of us are knowledge workers, and we need time for focus and deep concentration. And this constant checking of inboxes and going back to work, and inboxes and going back to work, is not giving us the kind of deep focus that we actually need. Cal Newport's latest book is called A World Without Email. I highly recommend it. I think it's one of the most genius books that's been written in a long time. And he calls this phenomenon the hyperactive hive mind. And it's a way of collaborating with each other that is made possible by email and instant messaging, but is not necessarily the best way to collaborate with each other. Not only, though, is this checking, this constant multitasking of going between our inboxes and our work, not only is it sort of a cognitive catastrophe, the other problem is that it's exhausting us. The constant multitasking, when we're feeling toasted at the end of the day, it's not just because you're tired and you've worked hard, it's because you've been multitasking all day long between all these different apps. So the way that we tame the hyperactive hive mind is by modifying how we work together and how work flows through an organization, because we know it is impossible to keep up with the messages, right? They just keep coming. There's just more apps. It's just more ping pong all the time. So the way that we tame the hyperactive hive mind, we change the way that we work and how work flows through the organization. And I can give you an example of a team that has done this specifically. It was a small team of about 5 people, and they worked on about 25, 30 different projects at any given time. It's a design team. And before, they were just constantly emailing each other about what's the status of this, what's going on with that, like lots of meetings all the time to discuss things. When they learned about the hyperactive hive mind, they recognized it in themselves immediately, and what they did is just set up a Trello dashboard with all of the projects there. Everything gets updated in real time on the dashboard, so they no longer need to just send emails back and forth to each other all day long. So that's just one example of how you would change the workflow to tame the hyperactive hive mind. Other teams are doing things like swarm times. So they'll agree like, okay, in the morning between 9 and 10 we'll be available for talking in inbox, and in the afternoon maybe again, but in between, the response times go way down, right? So it gives people a little bit of breathing room. And what we know about a good workflow, that really all that's required, is it makes it easy to review who's working on what and how it's going, without having to constantly message each other. The other great thing about modifying our workflows is that we start to work more out loud. And the important part of that comes from a quote that I got from Ryan Chartrand from X-Team, and he said, "People respect you more when they know how you contribute, and they start to question your value when they don't know how you contribute." And I actually got this phrase, working out loud, 10, maybe even 15 years ago from a man called John Stepper, who wrote the book Working Out Loud. And the reason why he wrote it was because he was working in a bank, and he was the only person in his department that had that specific job function. And at one time, the bank was starting to downsize, and he realized he's in danger of losing his job simply because nobody knew what he was doing. So he came up with this idea of working out loud and making our work visible to each other so that people knew what he was doing. But it's not just emails that are getting in the way, right? It's also meetings. Like I said before, we are all zoomed out. So one of the things that we want to do with meetings is we want to reduce the number of meetings that we need, and at the same time, improve the ones that we're having. One of the easiest places to start is simply by taking more breaks. When I interviewed NASA almost 10 years ago now, they said that they had a rule of thumb, because they have these day-long meetings with scientists from all over the world, and their rule of thumb was every 45 minutes, they would take a 5 to 15-minute physical break in between, just because they recognized that staring at the screen for that long just wasn't good for people, and people weren't able to hold their concentration. So this was a study that was done. It was the brains that you see at the top. It's one brain, 4 30-minute meetings without a break in between. So you can see that the red indicates areas of stress, and it increases as we go through the meetings. By the 4th meeting, it's decreased again. I'm not sure what's happening there. I think we're like so stressed that we're just like looping back around to calm again. I'm not sure. But you can see on the bottom, those are 4 30-minute meetings, with a 10-minute break in between. So you can see the difference. We feel it, right? If you've had back-to-back meetings for several hours, you're probably feeling pretty cracked out, but the science now shows that we are a little cracked out. One of my favorite quotes from a workshop attendee actually said, "Invitations are not obligations." Right? Just because somebody invites you to a meeting doesn't mean that you have to attend. So the question to really ask is, do you really need that meeting, or can any part of it be done asynchronously? And in fact, there's some really creative ways that people have used to eliminate meetings from their calendars. Some people are doing a meeting fast. It's like a food fast, right? Where you take food out of your body for 24 or 48 hours and then slowly reintroduce things. You can do the same things with meetings. So I've seen teams say, okay, next week, no meetings at all. And then after that, we're going to reintroduce the ones that we really missed. One person created this energy calendar. That's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. And the left-hand side, but I mean in the picture. He color-coded the meetings that gave him energy green. The ones that took energy, he color-coded them red. And the ones sort of, he made them yellow. And then he did something about all the red meetings. Maybe delegated, maybe changed them, designed them differently. That was another creative way. Other teams are doing meeting audits or ratings, so at the end of the meeting just saying like, how good was this for you? A 5 for great and a 1 for not so great, and then doing something about the meetings that don't do well. Other teams are recording their meetings, so not everybody has to be at every single meeting, right? But we do want to know what happened. So on my team, I do business coaching every week, but my team doesn't need to sit through those coaching sessions with me, so I just record those meetings for the team, and then they watch them later, probably on double or triple speed, as I would do, right? You want to just get the gist. And then when I worked for Management 3.0, Jürgen had a policy at the time. One of his many experiments was, no meetings allowed. If you want to have a meeting, you have to convince people to come. So I'd be like, okay, Jürgen, I really need you there because you're the only person that's worked with this client. And Sergey, I really need you there because you're the developer for this project. And I would have to convince them to come to the meeting. So some interesting techniques to try just to see and experiment, but we want to take out the meetings that we don't need out of the calendar because we're zoomed out. Aha, that was not the slide I was expecting. So we're reducing the number of meetings that we need, and at the same time, we want to improve the ones that we're having. Now, with hybrid meetings specifically, in the remote community, there's been a long-standing rule of thumb, which is when one person is remote, have everybody be remote, right? Because unless there is a specific reason that you need to have the meeting be hybrid, or that if you're not trained or to have hybrid or facilitate hybrid meetings, that you want to make sure to level the playing field. However, I know that's not always realistic and not always possible, so there's other things that we can do. And the first is that we need to improve the infrastructure at our offices. So if you still have these old spider phones in the middle of the table, raise your hand if you still have those in your office. Oh God, that's way too many hands. This is like should be left in the 80s, these things, right? These old spider phones. There's much better technology. With this technology, the remote participants are like the mosquitoes in the room. Like you know that they're there, you can kind of hear them, but you really wish they weren't, right? That is not an inclusive meeting, right? We want to move towards something that's much more reasonable. Now, this book, Suddenly Hybrid by Karen Reed, is probably the best book on hybrid meetings that I've ever read. And I didn't mean to read it, actually. She sent it to me to write a review, and I just picked it up to start flipping through it, and then hours later I had finished the book. So it was just that good. I mean, it's hard to imagine a book about meetings being that good. But in general, we want to revamp our conference rooms, right, to be more inclusive for remote participants. And it's not that hard. We just need to be able to see and hear each other clearly, and hopefully share a whiteboard or an agenda together where everybody's focused on the same thing. It's not just up to the companies, though, to improve their infrastructure. It's up to the individuals as well. I interviewed Envato, a company in Australia. Excuse me, I'm all nervous, so my voice is all weird. But I interviewed Envato in Australia, and they were founded by digital nomads and encouraged their employees to work outside of the office for at least 3 months of the year. This was pre-pandemic. The only rule was you had to have an internet speed of 20 megabits per second upload and download, otherwise you were considered on vacation. So that was the requirement. Like, great, go wherever you want, but make sure that you can connect at a reasonable speed. So this is my home office, actually. I got all fancy during the pandemic with my electric sit-stand desk and my Elgato lights. I've got a green screen curtain, all kinds of fun tools there. My Stream Deck where I can push a button and I feel all fancy. But the most important thing is I have an internet connection that's faster than 200 megabits per second, so that anything that comes my way, I can handle it. My husband can be watching Netflix and it doesn't affect anything at all. But I think more than infrastructure, the problem with meetings is in the design and the facilitation of them. Atlassian came out with a report several years ago that said, in order for people to consider your meeting to be good, it has to have a clear purpose, an agenda, and it has to start and end on time. That's it. Like, the bar is low. Like, we could do so much more than this. So if you're interested in design and facilitation of hybrid meetings, I think that it's an important topic, and Karen's book will definitely take you there. All right, but that's enough about meetings. We have other fun things to talk about. And I forgot to ask, Peter, is there sound on this at all? If it's possible, I've got a couple of videos I would love to show. There's one in particular by GitLab, and they're a sponsor here, so I wanted to definitely show it off. Sorry to put them on the spot. Well, I'll just start before I show the video. So I want to talk about defining normal behavior on our team. And while we're getting set up for the video, I'm going to ask you, all of the people, I'm going to ask, what time of day are you most productive? I've got a other side. If you're a sunrise person, if you're an early bird, go ahead and stand up. Yeah, let's just stand, because I think, whoa, I forgot I'm connected. Oh, look at all the early birds in the room. All right, look around, look around. Interesting. Okay, so go ahead and sit down. For those of you who are daylight people, if you're most productive in the day, go ahead and stand up. All right, another good amount, If you're a sunset person, your energy starts to come around 4, 6. There we go. I'm a sunset person myself. I don't know, it's not handy at all. All right, and who are our night owls in the group? Okay, we've got the night owls in the group. So what I like about this survey is that it shows that we all have very different preferences and needs for our own productivity. Right, and actually every time I do the survey, only 40% of any audiences really identifies themselves as daylight people, and the office was designed for the daylight people. So that's one of the great things about hybrid, is that we can really design our days around our own individual preferences, and it opens up a whole new form of living. Now, I interviewed Teo Heron, who's actually a Swedish creativity expert years ago, and so the video quality is not that good, and my hair is a different color. I was way younger back then. But he talks about the importance of working where you're most productive, and let's see if this works. So we haven't tested this, so I have not had good tech luck yet, but we'll see.
So what is it that is so good about leaving the office? What is it about that's so good about switching our place when we work?
Actually, I would say it's not leaving the office. I mean, let's say you're going to do invoicing. Okay, let me give you an example. I have a twin brother, looks like me, we're identical
I
twins.
noticed that as I was researching. I thought,
Who is this guy?
did I get something wrong?
I mean, same genes, same upbringing, look the same job actually. I mean, we're very similar. Same grades in school and stuff. My wife mistook him for me at my wedding. That's
wow.
Yeah, I know, or ex-wife actually, but it's kind of anyway.
So you guys are really similar, clearly.
Very similar. I forgave her. Anyway, if we're gonna do invoicing, for example, which is a good example, I find it very boring to do the invoices. So I want to do it at a very beautiful place. I can save invoices for like 2 or 3 months and then go to the ocean and sit at a cafe and then just do that boring stuff in like 4 hours, but do it at a very inspiring place. So it makes me feel good, even though the job is boring.
Yeah.
My brother hates invoicing as well, but he solves it in another way. He says, I find this so boring. So I want to sit like in a cellar or in a room with no windows. So it's so boring that I do this as quick as I can so I can leave it and then go to the ocean and relax. That's his way of solving it.
Okay.
So when you say, why is it good to leave the office? My answer is, well, it's not. If you find the office to be the best place to work, you should work 100% at your office. Right. The point is, I have yet to meet one person who says, all year round, doing all different tasks I have, and regardless of how I feel privately, I always find the office to be the best place to do all my tasks. No one has said yes to that question. Some people say, I find the office to be the best place 90% of the time. And then I said, perfect. Where are you spending the rest of your time, the 10%? And they say, at the office. And I say, that's wrong. You should spend those 10% at a better place than the office.
Right, so that is what hybrid opens up for us, is we get to choose, do we want to be in the cellar or do we want to be at the beach doing our invoicing, right? And so one thing that's coming up that I see a lot lately is people are creating personal user manuals for themselves. And if you go to my website, lisettesutherland.com, you'll see that I've got my personal user manual on my website open to the public. And all I've done is just shown what is important to know about working with me. So I've got like the languages that I speak, my time zone, my general working hours, how I like to communicate and give feedback and get feedback, right? All the different things that people might want to know about working with me. Or like, I really hate phone calls, but I love video calls. Or I'm a really slow writer. So if you just ask, oh, can't you just write us that one blog post? It's like, no, it's going to take me ages, right? It's amazing that I even wrote a book. So it's right, creating a personal user manual. One, it's a good introspection exercise to just understand what do I need to be productive, and it's really useful for the team that you work with to understand what you need to be productive. And it's also, it turns out, a good team building tool. Before you get on a call with somebody, check out their user manual. Is there something that you can connect with them with, right? Oh, you're a skier too, or oh, you sew, oh, okay, right? So we find points of connection, and we'll talk about team building in a little bit. Here's another example. This is from the Management 3.0 personal maps. So same thing, we're just drawing like a mind map of ourselves. And the idea is there's no formula for a personal user manual. It really should be personal. What do you feel comfortable sharing, right? It's not what the company says you should share. Here's a couple of other examples. The one on the left is from a professor at a Dutch university. She hands this PDF to her students at the beginning of the semester. The other one is a man named Steven who has he's a graphic designer, and he has his user manual open on the web. So very creative ways of doing it. I did mine as a website. I'll let the picture go. But just because we know how we work doesn't mean that we're going to align as a team together, right? So how do we align as a remote or hybrid team? And one of the things that we do is we create a team agreement and define what is normal behavior for our team. Now this can be like, okay, where is the information going to be stored? Are there security protocols we need to pay attention to? What are the expected response times? And what tools are we going to use to respond for certain situations? One of my interviewees said, like, you would never email the fire department when your house is on fire, right? Like, wrong communication tool. So we have to talk about that as a team. And this is a team agreement template. You can download it for free on the website. And it just goes through and it just walks teams through, like, oh, what are our team values, which are surprisingly important. I'll let Darren Murph explain that in a second. But also, how are we going to know what each other are doing? And what do we need to take care of ourselves and each other as a team? And just outlining these sort of behaviors makes all that implicit stuff a lot more explicit, and it gets rid of a lot of basic misunderstandings. We know that trust on remote teams is based on reliability, consistency, and responsiveness. Can I rely on you to get the work done? Are you providing work in a consistently high-quality way? And can I find you if I need to? Those are sort of the building blocks of trust, and a team agreement helps lay all those things out. And then for leaders, the important thing is that leaders need to role model the behavior that they want to see on their teams. I cannot tell you the number of times that I hear from teams that leaders are requiring people to go into the office and then not going in themselves. And that's just one of many examples that we're seeing. That is not motivating for the team, right? As a leader, you have to role model the behavior that you want to see. Now, GitLab operates as a handbook-first culture. So they've got a handbook. It is transparent and open on the internet. You can just Google it and find it. And this is what they use to run the entire company. Darren says, if it's not in the handbook, it doesn't exist. And so I want to play you a short video clip of the interview that I did with Darren a few months ago and how they use the handbook at their company.
But I want to dive into next the handbook, your central repository for how the company is run. And it's open to the public and it's very detailed. So it's not like there's a public version and a private version, there's one version. So why the transparency?
Yeah, this blew my mind when I was interviewing, and handbook undersells it to some degree. What it really is the actual operating manual of the company. Most people think of handbook and it's some flimsy PDF that gets revised gently and emailed around to the company once a year, and you have to take some quiz to say that you've read it. The GitLab handbook, we don't expect everyone to read 13,000 pages of it during onboarding. We just teach you how to search it. So some people ask me, hey, is the handbook too big? And I say, well, is there too much information on the internet? Or did you just learn how to use Google? And that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but we just teach people how to find what they need instead of trying to constrict the amount of information. It is public because transparency is one of our core values. GitLab has 6 core values. Together they spell credit. I would say Google the GitLab values page. It is a fascinating read. You'll find all 6 values as well as substantiating values, sub-values underneath. Transparency is a value because it makes us a better business. And when our handbook is public to the world, it reinforces our mission of everyone can contribute. A lot of the GitLab product has been influenced by the community. And if you aren't public with your product, how will the community know how to make it better? The same goes for our organizational design. We want our values to be public because we want others to look at it and help make it better if they so choose. A few years ago, we had someone who was a copywriter find our values page, and they actually made a merge request. This is a function within the GitLab program to update and edit some of the grammar on our values page to make it more readable. That is exactly the type of behavior that we want to instill. And the values page in particular is always evolving. In 2020 alone, we had almost 100 iterations to the company values page. And so I say the word values, but in practice, these are the actual tangible ways that we treat each other and the behaviors that we want to encourage across the team as well as outside of it.
So it's pretty powerful, I would say. And like I said before, when we go from a physical world to a more virtual world, we have to become a more documentation culture by nature. It is a different medium of work, right? We have to think of it as a different medium. I like to make the analogy between radio and television. They're both broadcasting mediums, but you would design content for radio very differently than you would for television. So the same is true for in-person versus remote and hybrid work. They are 2 separate mediums. What we did in the office does not translate directly online. We have to change the way that we work. So the last thing that I want to cover in just the 6 minutes that we have left is exploring some new ways of being present with each other. One thing that's become very clear is that high-performing teams are not necessarily based on physical presence anymore. And one of the more, I've been sort of promoting these tools for almost 10 years now, but I feel like now we really have a use for them. Like there's really a need, there's some pain out there. So instead of physical headquarters, I'm seeing lots of company moves more towards virtual headquarters. And there's many different tools out there. For every tool I show, there's 20 plus competitors. I'm not focused on the tool, I'm more focused on what the tool does. This one is called Welo. It's a virtual office. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's an office that you go to online. What you're looking at is down into the plan view of an office, and each of the individual boxes represents a room, and you can see that there's different people in that room. Now you can only hear and see the people that are in the same room as you, but if you want to go to another room, you just double click on that room and then you're in that room with those people. So this is another way of forming presence with each other. So you're not always like, hey, do you have time to meet? How's next Tuesday at 2 p.m.? Right now we can virtually stop by somebody's office and get back to work relatively quickly. Other tools are telepresence tools, right? These are drivable robots that you beam into, just like Zoom and or Teams, and now you can drive yourself around using the arrow keys on your keyboard. So this office is the Suitable Technologies office in California, and they have 50% of their workforce in the flesh and 50% who beam in every day via robot. And it does change some of the office etiquettes and stuff, because of course you can't shake hands with people, right? So instead, we fist bump. Right, that's way more 2D. You can do that through any screen. And then, of course, there's virtual reality. If you haven't tried it in the last year or two, it is absolutely mind-blowing what is possible. Meet in VR is my favorite meeting software. Within minutes of putting on your Oculus Quest, you are floating in a meeting room above space with your colleagues, and it's spatial, so you can hear who's to the right and to the left of you. You can draw something, pass it to the person next to you, they can add on to it, and then you can print it in 3D. Like, wow, it's amazing. And of course, not just virtual reality, but there's also holograms. Now, this is hologram technology from 2019. This is the Microsoft HoloLens, and I want to just give you a taste of what's possible, because it kind of blew my mind. Oops. Wrong button. I think this one has to be done differently.
First, let me introduce you to Mini-Me. There she is, my perfect holograph. And thanks to the power of HoloLens 2, she just floats right with me. I'm literally holding my hologram, so natural. Now she's a little small to do a keynote. So let's get her up so she can do full-size Japanese keynote. Render keynote.
ホログラムになることには本当に驚くべきことがあります。私たちは最新の複合現実キャプチャ技術を使用し、私のホログラムを作成しています。
Now, as you can see, this is mind-blowing technology. And what you just saw was my life-size hologram, my exact replica, rendered here in real time, speaking Japanese with my unique voice signature. To do this, we use mixed reality technology to create my hologram and render it here live. Then we use Azure's speech-to-text capability and English transcription to get my speech. Then use Azure Translate to get the speech into Japanese. And finally, applied neural text-to-speech technology so it sounded exactly like me, just speaking Japanese. And the most amazing part? All of these technologies exist today. The future is here.
So I'm very excited about hologram technology. I would love to beam in as a hologram here on stage. I'm a big fan of Star Trek, so the whole idea of holograms just sounds great. But in general, what I mean to say with showing these tools is that presence is no longer face-to-face, right? There are new ways of being present with each other. Most of us are still struggling with the old 1980s conference room phones, the old spider phones in our conference room, so we're a little bit far away from holograms anytime soon, but it's just kind of good to know where the market is headed. And of course, there is an app for everything. So there's a tools page on my website if you want to explore all the different tools that are available. But I will say it's not about the tool. I'm a tool junkie, so it's hard for me to say that, but it is what the behavior that the tool enhances. All right. So we are coming to the end, so I want to wrap up by saying, We know that the future of work is choice. It's very clear. Some people really want to go back to the office and some people really don't. But what everybody wants is the ability to choose. And it's in everybody's interest to make this work, because when we get it right, the payoff is huge. We as individuals get the freedom to design our days and our lives around the things that we love the most, and our companies get a stronger and more connected workforce that is not dependent on location. And that we do that by modifying how we communicate, taming the hyperactive hive mind. We need to define what is normal behavior on our teams, and we need to explore some new ways of being present with each other. So, I hope that I've given you some tips for hybrid working that you can take back into your own context so that if you go back to the office, that you don't go backwards in time. Thank you so much for your engaged attention today. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you at the keynote later. Thank you.